Um, and hi, I'm Jeremy Lent for anybody who is new. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this month's Deep Transformation Live Network meeting. And I'm joining us from Berkeley, California, in the U.S. And of course, today in the U.S. is July the 4th. And I've heard that some people around here call it Independence Day, but many of us have a different name for it. We call it Interdependence Day, an opportunity for us to celebrate our deep interdependence with each other and with all of life on this beautiful but suffering planet. And what better way to celebrate Interdependence Day than to be in conversation with a global network of leading activists and scholars from the global South who have a shared vision of building a worldwide network of groups like ours committed to transforming our dominant life-destroying system. And this group is the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, which is a group I came across a few years ago as I was just kind of doing general exploration of like what's out there in the world. And God, when I first saw it, I was just so enthused, like, wow, this is just so alive. And so it spoke so much to my own sense of this is just what we need. And so I'm very proud to tell you now that the Deep Transformation itself, the Deep Transformation Network, is now one of their endorsing organizations. So that gives me a sense of real pride in my heart. And today we get to engage with 4 of their leading weavers of this tapestry, Shrishtee Bajpai, Liepollo, Pheko, Vasna Ramasar, and Madhuresh Kumar. And we also might be joined later on in the discussion in the second half by one of the leaders who helped to create this network in the first place, Ashish Katari. And to me, this feels like it's such a special opportunity to explore like complementarities and maybe synergies between our 2 networks, and to really kind of, as we're talking with each other, like to ask ourselves, how can we learn from each other? And, how can we at the DTN potentially support that vision of the Global Tapestry of Alternatives? How can maybe we even explore ways to work together? And so that's what I see as the potential for today. But first, let's turn to our own network. And as we know, this meeting is our monthly opportunity to build our own deep interdependence as a global community, meet each other, build our social cohesion, get inspired by hearing what others are doing, and build the collective intelligence that we need. All of us need networks of networks to shift this trajectory we're on. And so to help build this cohesion, we're going to start off right now by actually going into breakout groups to begin with, just for 5 minutes initially, just to meet each other and build a heart connection. Then we're going to go into the panel discussion. And then after that, about half an hour of that, we'll rejoin the same breakout groups for another 10 minutes so we can have a deepening conversation. So right now, we're just going to go into the groups just to kind of meet each other. There's just enough time with 4 of you just to kind of share your name, where you're joining us from, and maybe a sentence of where your heart, mind is at right now, whatever you're feeling or whatever theme you want to see discussed later on, or just saying it's your first time here. And really, I ask you to kind of self-organize in these little groups, hold space for each other, make sure everyone in the group gets a chance to be heard. And you'll be in the same group later on, so no need to cover everything right now. So let us go into those groups right now, and we'll see each other all again in 5 minutes. Okay, it's talking away, and nobody was hearing me, I guess. I was just saying how heartwarming and wonderful that was for me. Well, let's just go directly into our conversation now, and we'll be able to like regroup in those same groups in just about half an hour or so, where we can talk about what's arising for us from this panel discussion. So if we could now just welcome, hey there, Vasna, Vasna Ramasar and Shrishtee Bajpai. Hi, Shrishtee, and Madhuresh Kumar. And then we also got Liepollo Pheko is going to be joining us. But oh, good. Your name is, you changed your name so we on the screen, so we can actually see you by your by knowing who you are. Welcome to you all. And as I said before, it's just, to me, it feels like an incredible moment to be able to actually talk with you after discovering you as an online kind of community some years ago, and just being so inspired by what you were doing. And the only thing I'm sorry about is I was saying early on is we just have this kind of 30 minutes and there's so much I want to cover with each of you, but then we'll have a second 30 minutes or so after the breakout rooms where everyone in this group will be invited to share your questions or share your thoughts. And so I also want to say to people, as you're hearing this conversation, if there's anything you feel like coming to your mind, you want to share as a question, or you want to just even share your reflections, I totally invite you to hold that and then put your Zoom hand up in the second half to join in the conversation. And if you feel a little less willing to be so more public, feel free to put your question or thought into the chat, and we'll try to pick that up and let that be sort of part of the conversation later on. So I'd like to sort of begin to focus with each of you just a little bit. Maybe Shrishtee, if I can turn to you first. And hi there, thanks for joining us. And Shrishtee, I understand you are based in India. Is that right?
Yes.
And Shrishtee, just so people know, is working basically primarily, as I understand it, on like environmental justice and exploring indigenous knowledge systems, and the sense of like more than human governance, along with going deep into the rights of nature. And there's a particular movement that I understand, Shrishtee, you are involved in, along with a number of people from the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, called the Vikalp Sangam movement. I wonder if maybe that might be a place to begin. If you can tell us about that movement and what that does, and then maybe we can just explore some of the implications around that and some of these other themes. So you want to tell us what the Vikalp Sangam movement is?
Yes, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you everybody for joining us today. And yeah, so Vikalp Sangam, which in English would translate as alternatives confluence, is a process that began around 2014 or 13. And the intention of that process was a bit of a frustration, which happens when we are involved in resistance movements, is that a lot of focus goes into firefighting, which is of course so important with the crisis we are facing, but also not enough time and space to actually think about what, if you're saying no to something, then what are we saying yes to? So it began with this intention that rather that we spend so much time in articulating what is wrong, that we don't have enough time to articulate what is going well, and the idea and belief that all of this is being also created on the ground. So it's not that it's an abstract idea that we have in mind that we need alternatives, but that alternatives are being created all the time by peoples and communities across the country. And so to invest a little bit more energy there of bringing people who are challenging the dominant extractive systems and trying to live that life differently. So one was to visualize these alternatives across India, and it's an India-based network. So visualizing these alternatives and processes, and then creating physical gatherings and confluences, and that's why confluences and sangams became an important part of it. and also creating spaces of creative imagination and envisioning for the futures. So a lot that capitalist systems have taken away from us, one being to be able to imagine and dream for different worlds. And I think in that way, Vikalp Sangam really focused on creating those imaginations and possibilities together, cross-sectorally and intersectionally, among various networks and peoples working on different themes. So yeah, briefly, that's what Vikalp Sangam has been and is trying to do over a decade or so, and organically part of the GTA network.
That's great. And so you actually have real, like 3 to 4 day meetings, getting together and actually sharing the pathways, it sounds like.
Yes.
And you know, I understand like a lot of that focus is looking at alternative indigenous ways of living. And so do different indigenous peoples within India get to sort of talk about and share their different approaches and how that works into, like, actually applies to their communities and how they live?
Yeah, and so not just indigenous communities, because in India there are also several other local communities like the peasants, fisher folks, and other such communities. So how does all of these groups come together? Some of them are community work, community people who are working on these issues. But it's also NGOs, social movements, resistance movements. They could also be sometimes scholars, people working in academic institutions, and quite a wide range of people. So yeah, it's based on certain themes. For example, alternative energy or alternative economies. So people say working on these themes across country coming together. And it's also based on the regions. So for example, the Western Himalayan region or the state that I come from. So different regions of the country as well, where people working on alternatives come together. So there are different ways that people try to come together, and they could be already involved in alternative processes or really interested in trying to do or wanting to do something.
Yeah, it's great. And I guess one of the big themes coming out of that is that sense of the rights of nature and the sense of really giving more sovereignty to our non-human relatives. And I saw that you're actually in a leading position in the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, which also, having come across recently, I can see it seems like it's really becoming like the sort of flagship driver towards getting that more into the global dialogue, that sense of that. Do you want to just give us just a brief sense of what that alliance is doing?
Yeah, well, I serve on the executive committee of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, but I think it's emerging, as we see across the world, is from people's belief of the connection, that there is no separation between humans and nature. So that in that separation that has happened over a long period of time, it's trying to rekindle that relationship that we humans have always had, and very grounded in indigenous people and other local communities' worldviews, who have lived with this sense of connection and still continue to live with that sense of connection. So rights is still a framework that we have to work with in these modern legal systems. Might not be an adequate framework to really incorporate the worldviews and different ways people live with nature, but then it gives us one interesting point to really change or radically transform the legal systems that exist. And it's also a good imaginary to have a river in the court of law, as a standing of arguing that she has the right to live as well as you and I.
I love that. Thank you, Shrishtee. That's so important. And you know, I'm writing a book about this vision of an ecological civilization, looking at what a civilization could look like if it was fundamentally life-affirming rather than built on wealth accumulation and extractivism. And the idea of rights of nature, to me, is one of those foundation points, is absolutely a required foundation for building that kind of different form of society. So thanks for all that. And let me turn now to Liepollo Pheko. Hi there, Liepollo is joining us from South Africa. And I just wanted to say, as I was finding out more about your work, Liepollo, I found that you just recently been on this panel at the Beyond Growth conference that was taking place in Europe, which was super inspiring for me and many people here on the network. And I saw you were on a panel with two of my favorite writers, Jason Hickel and Raj Patel. Just fantastic to see that. And something you were talking about, like a quote I pulled from what you were saying, how the world that has been constructed, you said, has been created by the exploitation of the majority world by the minority world. And I love that phrase for, instead of the global South, the majority world, which captures what it actually is about. And do you want to just tell us a little bit more about that in relation to the work that you do? And perhaps I should pause for a moment and just introduce you a little bit better there before we start. Liepollo is an activist scholar, public intellectual, focusing on a lot of decolonial, Africanist, feminist theories of, and looking at different, exploring alternatives to GDP. So looking at a lot of the intersectionality between feminism, decolonialism, and monetary sovereignty, I understand, for countries in the majority world. So let me ask you, Liepollo, if you want to just explain more how that deep history, that colonial history, has caused what we're looking at today.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. And it's really great to virtually be in this community with all the comrades from around the world. So yeah, I'll dive right into it. So firstly, the construct of majority versus minority world, as opposed to the old constructs of, developing, developed, least developed, global South, global North, and all of that. Firstly, it's important because it situates the fact that the majority world is the majority. That Black and brown people are the majority of the planet, and that historically we have also been the most extracted from and the most exploited as well. And I think it's an important relationality, because it also takes away from the discourse of, for example, describing people as ethnic minorities, this kind of language, especially in Europe and the US. We all have ethnicity. So that's, kind of anthropologically and, quite inaccurate. Everybody has a form of ethnicity. So it takes away from this fetishization of Black and brown people, firstly. And of course, we're not the minority, we're a majority within the majority. So really, it then helps us to describe much more appropriately and accurately the situation, which is basically white corporate male minority rule over the world, right? Over over majority interests. And that there's a historical trajectory of this, which is a 500-year history and trajectory. And this is what I was sharing at the Beyond Growth conference, but it's the sort of thing that people have heard me speak, will have heard me say many, many times, that there's a direct correlation between the sort of the globalization of economies that we see now, the market-led, market orthodox, neoliberal economies that we see now in the dogma, that this trajectory has its origins in the extraction of, firstly, people from the African continent to other worlds, and predominantly to the Americas, as they are now called, and that there's also been the ongoing extraction of minerals, and all of this to build economies of the global North, and that to call these then rich countries in the context that, in knowing that, of course, there's not a single diamond and not a single piece of gold that can be found in Belgium, in the UK, in Italy, other than one that's been stolen from places like South Africa or India, is extremely, it's problematic and it's inaccurate. My entry point in all of this is, of course, decolonial feminism. And I find it a very helpful entry point, because I think that firstly, decoloniality is incredibly important as a form of dismantling, identifying, and characterizing our concrete conditions. Feminism, because I think that feminism is a much more is a very important ideological form of resistance. And that's, I take my inspiration from what I call my feminist foremothers on this continent and beyond. So that would be people like Ransom Kuti, Wangari Maathai, Josina Machel, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and then beyond that, people like Audre Lorde, like Kimberly Crenshaw, like Bell Hooks, like Devaki Jain, although she's still very much with us, but she's, I mean, for her age, I call her a living ancestor, and I respect her accordingly. And I think that those are the sorts of ideas are a reproach against the kind of masculinist impulse for colonization, for occupation, for extraction, all of the things, some of the things that as well that Shrishtee was expressing, this need to not only occupy lands and cultures and languages, but also the need to occupy nature, which is why you can have a guy going to space for, you know, after lunch and coming back 15 minutes later at huge cost to the environment, to the planet, but also at huge cost to the value chain of people who have been part of building this empire. So I think I'll leave it there, but that's really, to situate me and my work and so forth. And of course, I belong to many political and movements like the Global Tapestry, among many. And I'm happy to be in community with people like yourselves as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Liepollo. So incredibly articulate in describing that. And I just so love this intersection you're describing between like feminism and decolonial work, because it's like when I think of like how we got to this place today, so we've had this 500 years of brutal colonialism that did all that looting and plundering. But then even beyond that, we go to like 7,000 to 10,000 years of patriarchy. And we've got to recognize how that underlying patriarchy has this oppressive power that goes along with colonialism. Just like you say, we can't separate those two. So I just think that's an incredibly important place to look. And so let me turn, I'm keeping my eyes on the time. I knew this would happen. I want to go deep with each of you, that I have to sort of pull back and make sure we all get some time to, just to cover the very sort of surface level of what we're doing. So let me turn to you, Vasna. And Vasna is also originally, I understand, from South Africa, a scholar activist. But now I think you're living and working in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. Vasna's been involved in like environmental justice, also with decolonial and feminist perspectives. And I understand, Vasna, a lot of what your work is looking at is this notion of kind of rethinking what might conventionally be called like Earth system governance. But as you were saying to me, maybe we can even just look at a different way of even framing that notion and thinking in terms of like the pluriverse, which I love. And and just as a shout out to that before we turn to you, Vasna, pluriverse is the name of a book that one of the founders of the GTI, Ashish Kothari, I shouldn't say authored. It's a compilation, but co-edited with a number of people, which I read this year as part of my own research for ecological civilization. It's so rich, I couldn't recommend it highly enough. So strongly recommend people explore that. But Vasna, you want to tell us what the pluriverse actually means and what the implications of that might be for rethinking global governance in general?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. And I think I will try to connect to also what Shrishtee and Liepollo have said already. I think as a starting point, I'd like to say that the reason I am suggesting we talk more on pluriverse rather than Earth system governance is that this idea of the Anthropocene, about the Earth system and so forth, really comes with this notion that we are a common humanity without actually acknowledging sort of the kind of inequalities that Liepollo has talked about already. And so we have to sort of understand that we are not all the same in this process. It also comes with the idea of top-down governance, right? That we can have a single solution to all the world's problems. The notion of the pluriverse draws from Zapatista thinking about a world where many worlds fit in. And so that is really where the Global Tapestry of Alternatives works, in the idea that there is no one single solution that would potentially erase the richness of our diversity, but rather finding ways to live and be and know in the world that are different and that are maybe complementary. So we're looking at the weaving of this tapestry where every thread is going to be different, right? And that's the beauty that it comes to it. This comes a lot from thinking out of Latin America, but it also speaks to the idea that when we think about justice, it's not just about sort of the distribution of who's got the diamonds and the gold, but also about whose knowledge counts, and this idea of a cognitive justice in what we do, acknowledging different ways to be in the world and how critically important that is to building some kind of different future. And also, as Shrishtee said, you know, imagining beyond just single solutions.
Right. Yeah, I totally hear you. And so you mentioned the Zapatistas as one thread in that, like quite literally, like that tapestry of alternatives. And I wondered if you just wanted to talk maybe about any other threads that you see from the point of view of different forms of governance, different forms of community deep democracy that you've been seeing that we should highlight and be inspired by.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things, and hopefully Ashish will come in at the end of the session as well. We've been thinking a lot and working a lot with groups which are focused on the idea of radical ecological democracy. And thinking about radical ecological democracy also means that you have to rethink the relationship with the state. What kind of states are we talking about? Recognizing and acknowledging that we have capitalist states that often are not actually working for people or for nature, non-human nature, but are working for particular elite and power in terms of capital. So where we're looking and where we're seeing from groups like Vikalp Sangam is different forms of governing, different forms of social organizing and mobilizing, which is much more grounded in relational ways of doing things, of actually having truly democratic processes of participation, but also seeing that there is a spectrum to how that can work. That are those groups that see themselves completely out of the state because of the oppressiveness of the state itself, and those who have tried to define themselves in a different kind of relationship, standing sort of within, but also trying to keep some kind of autonomy. And I think that we have to be really realistic that what we think of as democracies in the world right now have largely failed us. So we have to look at these different ways of organizing. And I think that there are more successful examples than we actually think about. So that's part of the work we're trying to do, is lift up those ones. And we call them weavers within the GTA.
Yeah, love that so much. Yeah, and you know, to me, a common theme I'm hearing from each of you, and it's one I sort of began to discern in this last year as I was doing this research for this book on ecological civilization, is simply this realization that the system as it is right now isn't broken. The system is actually doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is why we need to look at these really deep systemic alternatives. And even like you say, Vasna, like the nation states are intimately tied up with capitalism, with they grew out of the same sort of way, out of the same weave, basically, and they're kind of there almost to facilitate the extraction and exploitation that capitalism does, which maybe is a perfect moment, Madhuresh, to turn to you, because Madhuresh has actually been quite focused on these issues. Madhuresh is an Indian activist and researcher, and I understand that you're currently based in France right now, is that right? And is part of the anti-globalization and climate justice struggles, and recently helped to put out what I think is like a really important publication called The Great Takeover, Mapping of Multi-Stakeholderism in Global Governance, which I think is a really important theme as we're looking at, on the one hand, we're looking for alternative, more deep democracy systems. But meanwhile, I think what you're showing that, Madhuresh, maybe you want to talk about it more, is that meanwhile there's this takeover by these big global corporations and elites using this phrase that they call multi-stakeholderism as if it's kind of a good thing. And you want to just tell us a little bit more about that dynamic and what you've been mapping?
Yes, very quickly. I think it's not that something which we discovered like it was a great discovery, because we knew the power of corporations and how actually the brick and mortar corporations have completely changed today. The neoliberal reforms and the way the financial capital moves freely and is hidden away in so many different deep pockets or places or tax havens that we don't even need to talk that here. But I think what we did was that we started looking that while the UN systems, multilateral systems, were created with great hope, and people's sovereignty was, in a way, it was trying to be established. So what Vasna just said, that democracies have failed. But in that failure, it has also been that a lot of multilateral institutions which were created, they have also actually failed. And they have failed in a way that, and I think that we took this study during the time of the COVID, and we keep blaming that the philanthropic foundations, so like the Rockefellers and the Bill and Melinda Gates foundations and many all of Bezos foundations, those how they are gaming the system through the philanthropy. But at the same time, it's not that so they are the one actor, but then there are the actors like the DFID and the Foreign Development Agency, the World Bank, IMF, we can blame them.
Right.
But the WHO, which is meant to be a multilateral institution, they are more than willing to actually make a space for them. And same with the UNESCO. So the surprising thing is not only that they are the others who are making these demands and the pressures, and they are pushing a certain interest group, but our multilateral institutions are more than willing to make that a space, because there is ideological capture of the whole narrative that who constitutes people. So corporations have themselves have come to say that we are also people. We need a seat on the table. Philanthropic foundations who are accountable to no one, same as corporations, they have also got a seat at the table. So the MSIs don't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems so important. And of course, we see that in all of these kind of global processes going on, whether it's the IPCC and the COP conferences, where the real people affected by climate breakdown barely even get a chance to turn up at the conference. And if they get there, they're sort of pushed out in the periphery. And then all the fossil fuel corporations themselves are the ones that basically sponsor the conference. I mean, talk about inviting the fox into the henhouse, which is why we don't even mention the word like fossil fuels or whatever in the official plans that the conference puts out and things like that. So it seems really important that we become more aware of that. And at the moment, I think most people in the world don't have a sense of how important that kind of takeover is, and what a threat that is to any kind of really people-driven future. And I think you are also involved, or have been involved, in the World Social Forum process a lot, which is, I think, trying to be an alternative focus of like a different way of getting conversation. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, very briefly. I think the World Social Forum came in being in the early 21st century, so 1908, 99. It was building on the anti-globalization wave, Battle of Seattle, and then in 2001, it took really shape. And I think the GTA is in a way inspired by the World Social Forum experiment, because in some ways the another world is possible, the slogan, has now in a way manifesting in a sense of pluriverse, that all kinds of worlds are possible, or many worlds are possible. And the idea of pluriverse is actually taking from that that we can build it. And the GTA, what we are trying to do is that while WSA provided the space for many movements to come together, GTA in a way is saying that, well, WSA critiqued the system and said that here is the critique and this is what possibilities exist. People need to come together, take action. And the GTA is saying that, well, over a period of time, we know the alternatives exist. They are already there. What we do need to talk about is to talk about them rather than constantly talk in the frame of critique. So it's like you are talking a critique of capitalism as a reference point. Why don't we talk about our own world? That here is the world which already exists. The idea is to build it and continue to grow and grow and grow. And that focus is also linked with the last thing which you mentioned earlier about the dynamics for catalyzing global political change. I think I would put it as that if we keep focusing on the nation states, then we will not be able to make much progress. If we focus on where we are and the alternatives which exist, the practices of communities which exist, and if we start building on that and use that as the frame of reference, then what will happen is that we are shifting the whole narrative and bringing them on our terms of debate and the question, rather than constantly referring to them. The more we talk about them, it becomes about them. So I think what we are trying to say is let's talk about ourselves, what we are already doing, what we already have.
I'm so with you. I just get so inspired by this conversation, because that's what I so firmly believe in. What the DTN is all about is exactly that same thing. Realizing, I mean, the critiques are necessary, because without them, we don't get to see how deeply we need to like transform. But it's the real power is in that kind of gleam, that possibility of what can pull us into that alternative future. So, well, this has just been a great, just kind of the very, very tip of the iceberg sort of thing of all the depth of what you're working on. But I'd like to pause right now, and maybe we'll go spend 10 minutes back in those same breakout groups we were in before. And in those breakout groups, I just put into the chat, what I'd like to invite in the conversations is for everybody to share. Everyone's got the chance to like then speak their own heart and mind. Which strands of these alternatives that people have just been touching on resonate most powerfully with your own weaving of transformation? So just to speak from your own heart, like which is the one, and maybe there's more than one, that's really speaking powerfully to that. And as we go into the breakout groups, just as a reminder, I'll hope it's not going to be too intrusive, but what I'll do is I'll sort of hover in like a fly on the wall to different groups for like a minute or two at a time, just so I can sort of feel into different multiple conversations. And then we'll meet each other in full 10 minutes from now. And then that'll be the chance for each of you. I've been hogging the conversation, but it'll be the chance for other people in the Deep Transformation Network to ask questions, explore more deeply some of these themes with you all. So let's go into those breakout groups right now. See you all back in 10 minutes. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the main room. And yeah, I was getting a sense that from some of the different groups I hovered into, that other people feel just as inspired and just energized by what the Global Tapestry of Alternatives is doing, as I do. I just found as the conversation has been going, just the energy in me has just been like getting stronger and stronger, like this kind of glow, like sort of blowing on a fire that is just starting up, and the flames begin to start kind of coming up. So let's, at this point, invite back to the spotlight each of the panelists who were here with us before. And perhaps we could also invite Ashish Khatari to join the panel too. Hi there, Ashish. So Ashish, by the way, is one of the original founders of the Global Tapestry of Alternatives. And I was connecting with Ashish. We've just connected by email over the month or so. But so I'm honored, Ashish, to have you in the conversation directly and have you join us today too. So this is an opportunity now. If you have anything you want to share or ask any of the panelists, please put up your Zoom hand. And I see Andy is the first to. And so I think that there's tons and so many different things for us to talk through. So let's begin with you, Andy. Welcome. And other people, feel free to just join in the line as this conversation takes place. And again, if you want to put into the chat other questions, we can introduce those too. So, hey there, Andy. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Jeremy. Like the others in my group, I was utterly impressed by the presentations by the panel. And it really impressed me that we're talking to a group of people from the global majority. And I felt the level of intelligence and awareness about the global situation was so great that it made me feel, why isn't the global majority actually taking the lead in this deep transformation, which this very network is about? And I mean, the fact is that our network is probably mainly made up of people from the global minority. That's not, a criticism. It's just the way it's evolved. And so I would really appreciate any guidance from the people on the panel on how we in the Deep Transformation Network can really support you to bring about your goals.
Beautiful.
Well, our goals, our collective goals. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that, Andy. I just speak to my heart, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you. Vasna, yeah.
Hello, Jeremy.
Oh.
Hello, Jeremy. It's Remedios. I finally got in with voice.
Oh, hello. Who is that? Who? I'm not sure we caught.
This is Remedios. Remedios
Rappaport. Remedios. Hey, great. We're in the panel discussion now, Remedios. So if you want to just listen in, but if you have a question for any of the panelists, that's great. And let's have you join after we just had a question from Andy. But if you have a question, that'll be great to join us with a question. Otherwise, let's put you on hold right now. We're just answering Andy's question. And Vasna, I think you were going to.
That sounds good. Thanks. I have a short report of being here.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, for raising that point. It's something that I also brought up in our group discussion, because it is visible that, yeah, the group of who's present here today doesn't represent the majority of the world, and that's also on an age thing as well. And so how do we actually relate to each other? How do we actually find the ways to work better together? And some people use the word allyship, others think that that's not a concept that we should use. To me, I think the first thing is it's really important to acknowledge the privileges that we have. And that's not to say that you have you only are the only one with a privilege. I, of course, also have my privileges. They're just different. So how do we actually use our privileges in the best way possible? But also, how do we change the narratives and the stories? So I really appreciate the fact that someone shared about a cause that's happening in Edinburgh, and that's fantastic. But I would love it if people are also sharing courses that are happening, from universities in Ghana or universities in Ecuador or somewhere else in the world, that our literatures that we share, the names that we throw out, that also has to be conscious in how we do that, because the narrative is so narrow right now in the world. There is such a monopoly, there is a hegemony in the worst way possible. And so part of our role is to actually do that. And then I think the second part is also listen and give the platform to others as well. It's part of, I think, the way we have to figure out how to work better with each other.
Yeah. Thanks, Vasna. Makes so much sense. Anybody else on the panel want to share other perspectives on that, or? Ashish, yeah.
I just wanted to quickly add that I think one of our biggest challenges is reaching people's hearts, not just minds. And I think one of the weaknesses of many of our movements, social movements, human rights movements, ecological movements, has been that we are been a bit too cerebral. You know, we have all the facts and figures and all of that, and of course that's important. But what are the ways by which we can actually, reach emotions, reach hearts, reach value systems, ethics, principles? And I think the Deep Transformation Network, from whatever I know of your work, Jeremy, yours, but also of the network, has some of those strengths. So I think for the GTA and the DTN to work together on, just getting better at messaging, more powerful in a good sense, at reaching a lot of people who otherwise are not necessarily reading us or listening to us, is something we can let's talk about that and see how we can do that more better.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, because ultimately people are driven by what their heart tells them more than their heads. And at the end of a conversation, people won't even be able to remember 95% of what was said, but they'll remember what they felt in that conversation. And that's so right. And yeah, thanks for that. And it does feel to me like there is this potential, complementary potential, in the sense that, yes, everything that Vasna and Andy notice is completely right about this is what this network is right now. It's not what this network wants to be growing out, but it feels like through these connections is where we can maybe bring whatever particular privileges, whatever particular energies we have in this network for part of this global, more global transformation that's needed. So thanks. And let's turn to Carmen with a, you want to join us, Carmen?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy, for this amazing opportunity. Yeah. So I'm from Puerto Rico, which is a little island in the Caribbean, a colony still of the United States of America. So I do represent the majority, the world majority, as a Latino woman. And my father was in the Army, in the US Army. And as a little Army brat, which is what we're called, I internalized the oppressor, the colonizer, completely. And I studied education. My PhD is in education. And when I started teaching in New York City, in Manhattan, I taught in a college, which was a Puerto Rican college. It was the Puerto Rican college in New York City. And I was given the course Puerto Rican history, of which I knew nothing about, pretty much. So I had to prepare in order to teach it. And there I discovered a book that I shared in the breakout session, and Vasna has read, and I'm going to share it with you now, which is a book, I read it in the 1970s. It's called The Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. And that book, it hit me like a ton of bricks, I have to tell you. It just completely shifted my thinking. So anyway, coming back to the Deep Transformation Network and what we're doing here, Jeremy, I am pleased to be, super pleased and blessed to be, I think, the last moderator in the moderators group of the Deep Transformation Network. And I'm going to take it upon myself to open this up and to bring people from the global majority into this network in any way, shape, or form that I can. I wanted to share that. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Carmen. So lovely to hear your voice on that. And yeah, I'm with you, and I'm so glad to feel your energy in that regard. Thanks. And let's turn to Larissa.
Hi, thanks, Jeremy. Yes, those comments about the contrast between who is in this Deep Transformation Network and the speakers that you've been inviting recently, Jeremy, is very noticeable, and one that, as you know, I comment on every time I come to a meeting, and ask for for it to be accounted. I can't understand it, why these transformation communities in North America have such an unrepresentative membership makeup. And which is why it makes these meetings like this one today so exciting to somebody like me. So that's one thing I wanted to say, and I would be very, very excited to participate in any effort you want to make organizationally. The other thing is that I was very interested to hear that the Global Tapestry of Alternatives was based in some way on the World Social Forum, because two volumes that have been on my shelf for many years were from the 2007 World Social Forum. And there are these two volumes which were edited and compiled by Varuna Kumar, and they are full of pieces, including one by Eduardo Galeano, who wrote that incredible book opening up the discussion on Latin America. And it's called The Upside Down World, which is what I've been commenting on in the breakout groups, how everything is down to the stories that have been, the narrative that has been imposed on us, which is a narrative that has stolen the story from everybody and rewritten it. So it's work that I think would be great to be more widely shared if there was some way to do that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks. And can you put the name of the book in the chat, or if somebody else can do that, but so we can all connect with that. Thanks. And Vasna, I think you wanted to say something to that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to claim too much space, but I just wanted to briefly mention that, with the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, we work with amazing African-American groups as well, Cooperative Jackson and others who also have the same ideas. So there are a lot of such groups in the US as well. And also just in relation to the comment from Diana about younger people, I think at least in Europe, but also in Africa, young people are involved and engaged as activists, as climate activists and other things. So it's not just that there's a struggle to get by. People are engaging. They're just finding the platforms that resonate with them. Yeah, that makes so much sense, Vasna. Thanks. And let me just add, by the way, as an invitation, one of the ways in which we're envisaging the actual platform of the Deep Transformation Network is we're inviting groups to simply create a group on the network, so that other people, as they join the network, they can see the group and get involved in the conversation there. So I just kind of want to put an open invitation to all of you from the Global Tapestry of Alternatives. If you feel inclined to do that, we'd love to see you basically create a group on the DTN as a kind of a portal, if you will, something like that, so people can then get more connected with you and the potential for those two networks to kind of grow together more. So obviously we can look at that more in detail, but I just wanted to put that out there as something that might be a possible path forward to kind of enjoy that complementarity more or whatever. So let me turn to Monique. And I'm also seeing we're coming close to the end, so we may have time for maybe one more question or comment, but then we'll have to draw a close for right now. Monique, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. Hello, Global Tapestry of Alternatives, people in particular. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. I have a question. With the new venture I'm creating, actually in the mindset shift space, I'm trying to address questions like how can we create a mindset shift towards we are nature? How can we reconnect more people to the land, soil, nature? And I guess it will be through experience, through literally going through it, doing it, and best would be to embed it in our daily lives, I think. But at the moment, I'm looking for pains and gains of mostly, I would say, unaware people who don't know there is a pain and there's a lot to gain, if you understand what I mean. We don't know what we don't know, right? So I wonder, do you know how I can identify the pains and gains of unaware people?
Who wants to try to?
Okay, I'll give it a try, but of course others can also add. I think one way to I was actually in a conversation this morning with some people who were also exploring similar things here in Rotterdam, and it was interesting to have this conversation because the one problem that, for example, in people who are in this context would know that for a long time they have been trying to divert water rather than embrace water, and so the crisis is that now the city is below the sea level. So I think it comes to that point where one is that we have always colonized our mind with engineering of how we engineer the water and how we engineer the landscapes around us. Whereas now, especially in the West, maybe people are beginning to realize that we cannot engineer things. We have to live with them. And how do we live with harmony and some sort of a symbiosis? And I think one process to begin doing that is to creating spaces for people to know the landscapes, to know water, to know the forest. I think one big problem is that we don't know our surroundings enough to really being able to protect them. So even knowing the trauma that a water body might be going through helps you connect to your own trauma, to your own grief. And I think that plays a very healing part, because then you know what it really may be to a certain extent, not fully maybe, but to some extent, you really begin to understand when a river is polluted, what does it feel like? And you can relate it to your trauma. So I think the beginning is to see even not just beautiful landscapes, but also to see the destruction that we are causing, going to a landfill and understanding what we are doing. And then once we begin to know that connection, I think a lot changes, because then we begin to know the species. Then we begin to know what nurtures this and what destroys it. So I think beginning of knowing is really creating that space of what we gain when we protect this, and how do we relate with this, what is being lost. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shrishtee. And you know, I'm sad to say we've really hit our time here. We've had I'd love this conversation to go further, and maybe if I could just close by making this invitation that this is really just the beginning of different conversations. Last month we also started a deeper connection with the Equatorial Voices Network, which is one that actually I mentioned to some of you here at the GTA, because there's going to be a meeting taking place in Kenya. And maybe before, as we're closing now, maybe I can just turn to you, Ashish, if you just wanted to say a little bit about what's going to be happening in Kenya, this kind of in-person meeting, so that people know of that possibility as another step forward.
Yeah, sure. So actually, we haven't really had the opportunity of explaining the GTA structure. It's a very mostly an informal structure, but we have what some of my colleagues said were the weavers, which are currently networks in Colombia, Mexico, India, and Southeast Asia, and where, of course, many more are coming on board. But we also have the endorsers, and like DTN, there's about 60, 70 endorsing networks and organizations around the world. And then we have the core team, which is the 5 of us right now on the screen, and 15 other colleagues. So all these 3 elements of the structure are coming together as a GTA assembly. I mean, the assembly's been around, but we've been meeting only online. So this is the first physical meeting of the assembly in Kenya next month. We're very excited because it's going to be the first time we'll be able to actually be physically with each other, including those of us who've been on the screen for the last 3 years. So being able to hug each other and, be really, I mean, it's a very different conversation when we're physically together, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we're also looking forward to working on many more exciting projects and processes together, more collaborations, more constructively challenging each other, and building towards, trying to create much more of a critical mass for the global change that we need, but also the support to all the wonderful local initiatives that we're connected with.
Yeah. That's how sounds great. And maybe we can explore ways over the next few weeks, if there's a way we can, any people from the DTN might actually join in person in Kenya, or anything that we can do to explore further. And I just want to say from my heart, such a deep thanks of gratitude to each of you for taking the time to kind of share what you're doing with us here on the DTN, and just a personal gratitude from my heart. I feel so inspired, and it's so great to read about all the stuff that you're doing, and then to actually be with you in person and to feel you and the fullness of that interaction is so special. It's a treasure. And I want everyone on the DTN to also know we're actually starting a new process, right? Starting this month. Sometimes there's this kind of discussion on the DTN where we talk a lot about these things, but what do we do about them? Where's that next step? And what we're starting beginning this month is a follow-up meeting. Actually next Thursday. I'm going to put the link to the event right now in the chat, which is going to be like a circle of practice follow-up that gives us a chance to actually take whatever has been arising right now, and maybe in a somewhat of a calmer space, rather than all this sort of energy of everything happening, but actually to spend some time and talk about how that's actually going to lead to actual practice for each of us. So this is our first monthly dialogue session being hosted by Miriam and Sigurd and Galia. Around the themes that arose today. So please, if you can make it to this meeting next week, let's do that. Let's follow on. So these things don't get lost just as ideas, but move into action. So that's going to be great. And just as a quick announcement before we say goodbye today on this Interdependence Day, is just to let you know that on Tuesday, July 25th, California time, Wednesday morning, Melbourne time on July 26th, I'm going to be in conversation with the next of our DTN live interactive conversations with the ecological philosopher, Freya Matthews, who's joining us from Melbourne, who just recently wrote this incredible book called The Tao of Civilization, which her work is, which actually I refer to in the Web of Meaning in my own book. She does this incredible integration of ecological thinking, Taoist thinking, indigenous thinking, which she kind of summarizes in this book, The Tao of Civilization. And along with Freya Matthews, we're going to be joined by Jinfeng Zhao from China, who is a leading environmental activist there in China, head of the Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation there. So it's going to be a three-way conversation on this question of the Tao of civilization, and really asking, are there ways in which China, coming from this traditional values of Chinese thought, can actually help to lead the way towards that ecological civilization that we all know we need? So that'll be another maybe strand to explore in this tapestry of alternatives. And the event will go up on the DTN in the next day or two, so keep your eyes peeled. So thank you so much for this incredible conversation, and I hope it's the first of many more in the future. Thanks, and maybe see you around on the network.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.